rich discussions. My Chinese is not that good, but good enough. I can hear some good enough. But we heard a lot of really rich discussions about what this is like. In the U.S. context, this idea of practicing teaching is still very new. And so we as CSED have been doing a lot of work around this with teachers that we work with directly, including your teachers who've had the opportunity to practice this, to do a rehearsal of teaching. So as I was listening to a lot of the tables, I know you have a lot of really great ideas. I asked 3 tables to share, and of course, if you would like to share, and I didn't ask a table, please feel free to do so. So I think we will start with table 3 back here. What are your thoughts on these questions up here?
Okay, to answer question 1, we think that it is when there's a rehearsal phase, it means that it is a platform for teachers to recycle maybe ideas on the concept with the peer of their colleagues. And I think it is a good way to maybe to have a deeper understanding of the topic, because for each independent teachers, maybe they can have their own style or own way to go through a topic. So through rehearsal phase with the peers, I think it is also a peer learning within the group members.
So let me see if I get this idea right. What you're saying is, if a group of teachers are practicing together, it's not only for the benefit of the person who has to practice, but for everybody sitting there together to learn together, all the entire group. Okay, and I think I called on table 5. The spokesperson is here.
Okay, in our school, we will have a rehearsal phase of the cycle. We will select some topic in the meeting. All the teachers will discuss the lesson plan and then how to work out the lesson plan, and then to review what the weakness or the disadvantage of the lesson plan or the feedback of the students, and then review and revise the lesson plan, and then the next lesson, another teacher to work out the lesson plan. This is a good practice for us to let the student become improvement.
I'm glad you brought that up, because we had a conversation here at table 2 about this idea of co-planning lessons. Okay, and actually, I don't know if someone from table 2 is willing to talk about this idea of co-planning as well as rehearsal, because those are slightly 2 different things. Is anybody willing to talk about it here?
So because when we are having co-prep lesson, normally we will at the same time prepare some kind of question for a student. So I think this kind of rehearsal is good, because we can anticipate what the student's answer will be like, and then we can actually discuss what is the best way to address their questions. And yeah, I think that is good, because the teachers can have some kind of mental rehearsal before they get into the classroom, so that they can better prepare themselves for all the challenges that may come up from students, I think.
Yeah, we had a long talk about this idea of preparing, right? So the co-planning lesson, it's interesting because when I did school visits here in Hong Kong, I realized that a lot of school leaders have planned time for teachers to work together, and that co-planning a lesson is and I can tell by the nod to your head is quite common to have departments or groups of teachers plan together. But the difference between planning, which is important, and rehearsing is that there is I'm not just mentally going to think about what questions, I'm actually going to practice doing it. And so we had a conversation here about the role. So what you saw in the rehearsal was a teacher sitting with a group of other teachers. And so she is playing the role of the teacher. I'm going to ask some questions. The other teachers are but they are playing the role of students. Not being goofy like students, right? But they are mentally engaging and responding to the text so that the teacher can practice what to do next, right? So then in that same group, when the teacher is done, we actually do a protocol where the teachers give feedback, and the teacher who is rehearsing has a chance to hear the feedback and make adjustments, and then go back to any of the lessons that were planned and adjust because of the practice, right? And it benefits the whole group. Now, within that same group, if this were one group, if this were the rehearsing teacher, now she is done. In the next cycle, it would be the next teacher's turn. And then you would receive feedback. And the next teacher, so everybody gets a chance to practice. So the idea of co-planning a lesson and rehearsals are actually quite different, because it really is not just the mental, it's the physical. I'm actually going to rehearse it, right? And table 10, some ideas here that you discussed.
We would like to focus on question 2. In our college, we organize some learning circles from teachers. For example, Chinese, English, mathematics, and legal studies. 3 to 5 teachers are grouped into a learning circle. They will discuss a lesson to have a collaborative preparation. Different teachers will throw their ideas about this topic. And in Hong Kong context, we are afraid that we have time to rehearse the lessons. But we will do the rehearsal during our lessons. The first step is the collaborative preparation. And then the second step, the 3 to 5 teachers will take part in their lessons. Okay. For example, the first teacher will teach this topic first, and the other teachers will observe the lessons. And then after the lessons, there will be the next step is the debriefing session. They will discuss the strength or the limitations of the lessons, and then they give ideas to improve it. And then the second teachers will revise their lesson plan and then try to do it again. And then there are 4 to 5 times to improve the teaching in the class. This is a good practice for our teachers to how to improve their teaching techniques. And besides that, we believe that this practice must be excluded from the appraisal system. It should be developmental.
Okay, several key points there that I thought was great. Now, you described a cycle that in the US we call lesson study, right? And so where groups of teachers go into each other's classrooms, and in between there's a debrief session. So I participated in those before, and that is a way of practicing and revising a lesson. You said there's a couple of things that are different about a rehearsal that I'd like to point out that is very, very useful. As a former school administrator myself, we know that those cycles take all day, right? And it requires taking teachers out of the classroom and getting substitute teachers in there and watching each other, and it's wonderful, but it's also quite expensive, right? Because you have to get the other teachers in there, and it takes a long time. And so the idea of practicing a whole lesson, even though that is a luxury to be able to do, and yet you're practicing in front of kids, right? So we always say if I have my first period, they're the ones I practice on, because by the time I get to 6th period, it's a lot better, right? My 6th class. So one of the things that we have to think about too is time. And we had that conversation again in table 2. How much of this lesson did the teacher practice? So in a given lesson, the teacher is practicing having the discussion part. So it's a very discrete portion of the lesson that the teachers are practicing. So that makes it something where if we're just focused in on it, I want to engage students in academic discussion, and I'm going to try to plan questions that elicit student thinking, right? That's focus. It focuses in here. When we do a lesson study, there's lots of things that are wonderful about that too, because we can give feedback, everything from the class setup, right, to the questions we asked, to was that the right handout, did we have the right questions and homework, the task. So you're looking at lots of things. In a rehearsal, you're looking at a very particular smaller, discrete portion of practice. So all that to say that there's a different time and place to do these things depending on what your goal is, right, and what you want the teachers to learn. So I'm pointing out some of these differences. What was the other thing that you said? I'm trying to think. The time. Outside, yes, thank you. Outside of appraisal. We're going to talk a little bit more about this tomorrow, but the evaluation piece, the appraisal and evaluation piece, being school administrators, right? Most of you are in, I know that there are some teachers in this room as well, that if you're in a position of evaluation, what is the difference there between how do you set up a space where teachers believe that this is for the purpose of learning and not for appraisal? By the mere fact that you are school administrators already, there's already a difference in your role. And so the teachers are responding to you in a different way. So in this group, we have a group of teachers working together with a facilitator. I think it's something to say that I think we can go to the next slide. I think that's a good segue to the next slide. Okay. So this idea under bullet 2 that rehearsal is a safe space to practice. How do you create in these contexts a safe space? Who's in the group? What are they looking at? How do we develop some norms? We did some norms here in the beginning of how we want to interact with each other. Can the administrator act as a facilitator? Or do you put a teacher leader, a department head, doing that work? Do you train another teacher who is very skilled in doing that work to be able to facilitate this kind of group discussion? A lot of the rehearsals, there's a protocol where everybody in that group, if followed, has a chance to lead the group, right? So nobody's in charge. Everybody is equal. Everybody has equal responsibility. So how you set that up, who you put in that group, and how you set up the expectations for it. You know, does the feedback get reported back to somebody? Or after everyone is done, when they give feedback, everyone just hands it to the teacher. He says, there you go, right? And so that's only for the teacher's eyes. Who gets to see it? I think these are all really, really important things to consider. I know that what we do is we model in these rehearsals some protocols that teachers get, the ways that the expectations we set up about why we're doing this practice and that we want it's to help you get better. Yeah, David. We can give you some sample protocols and link it as resources, particularly the protocols that the teachers used from I3. Yeah. And depending on how much time you're giving teachers to do this together, how many cycles would you expect? You know, those are the kinds of things that you can adjust to meet your context and your needs. But it's very, very important to attend to. The idea that rehearsal is not a performance. It is something that teachers need to say, I'm going to choose something not because I'm trying to show off how good I am at asking questions, but I'm going to pick something that I have. We asked here, what part do you practice? You practice the hardest part. The part you don't know how to do the most. That's what you want to practice, because that's where you need the feedback. This idea of taking risks, remember we talked about that? Taking a risk, it's hard. Sharon and I, to be very explicit, there's a lot of people in this room. We're only here for a few days. Not all of you know each other in here. We are working very hard for you to get to know each other and to feel safe to have these kinds of discussions and to push on your thinking, right? So we are doing openers, setting norms, asking for different groups of people to work together. This is very intentional. So when we have teachers, just because they show up in the same room together, some of you are at very, very large schools. And I know that we work with some schools in Los Angeles that have 3,200 students, which may be smaller than some of your schools, I know may be bigger than some of your schools, but to us that's a pretty large school, where some of the teachers don't even know each other's names because there's no time for them to interact. So just putting them in the same room does not create community. How you create the community matters. And this kind of work cannot be done without that community. Rehearsals are a learning opportunity, like we said here, for everybody involved, not just the person who's on the spot, right? Everybody learns from it, and the idea is for everybody to take something back. This idea of timeout, you did not see it in the video we did before, but in that video where you saw the teacher just trying something with other teachers, there is this idea of timeout, where the teacher can stop the rehearsal. So she may be asking questions and trying to engage you in the conversation, and the students, because of what she asked, the conversation is going a way she did not want it to go. She can say, wait, time out. When I asked this, it went this way. I need the group to help me. I wanted it to go a different direction. What question should I ask? So the group might give feedback right there. Well, have you tried this? Have you tried that? The teacher says, okay, time out. I'm going to rewind. I'm going to rewind to this question, and let's try this again. And you step back in, right? So a teacher, in parts of the protocol, is allowed to say, I made a mistake because it went this way. I need to practice. I'm going to rewind. Go back and try again with the help of everybody else. So it's a very important aspect. And this idea of staying in character. There is a difference between, I'm going to talk you through the lesson and say, oh, this is what I'm going to do. Because it's very easy to say, I'm going to do this, and then the students will do that, and then I'm going to do this, and the students are going to do that. To stay in character means, I'm going to ask the question as if I'm really teaching, right? It makes a difference because the uncomfortable times where you don't know what to do, that's what we want the teacher to experience so that they can figure out how to get out of that, how to move through that difficult situation. If a teacher doesn't stay inside that character of really practicing teaching, talking through does not produce that same discomfort that allows for the learning. Do I have any questions about some of these points? There's a lot here, and yes, we will definitely, to make sure that I don't lose track, like I need examples of protocols for rehearsals, make sure you use the sticky note. Yeah, I put it on the need side, because if I see it, that will remind me at the end of the day to make sure that Sharon and I find some things, and Janet and Suzanne find the things that we need, and we'll put it onto to your resource document, so you all have the same thing. Do I have any questions or comments or thoughts about these kinds of ideas here? Sure.
Such a rehearsal is good, very good indeed. For novice teachers, they must be very willing to try this out. How can we motivate those experienced teachers who can try this out?
That's a very, very good question and very common with us too. I think that's a global issue with the experience versus novice, right? I think there's some things with this idea of empowering teachers to say, hey, others might benefit from you doing this, right? How can we work together? I think there's some things here, depending on who the teacher is, that gets to say, even though they might be experienced, they might not be the best, right? We know those two things are not the same, right? But to get someone willing to try something means that we have to think about how they might feel safe. Sometimes teachers that are very, how should I say it, confident in their abilities, sometimes that's just a wall, right? They don't want anybody else to see, possibly, right, that they could make a mistake too. So I think one of the things to think about and develop the formation of these groups that grow together is how can we help people see that by working in collaboration, that they can offer and receive. And if the teachers are very experienced, it doesn't mean we want everyone to become a lifelong learner, right? That there has to be, that not everybody has the answer to everything. But we also do want to empower teachers that have very strong teaching practices to maybe become some of the facilitators. If they really do have the skills and they're very sincere, right, then we want to say, how can we help push everybody else's thinking in the whole school? How can we leverage what they know? Okay? So it depends on who the teacher is and what you as school leaders think that teachers need to learn. So I'm sure in your head you can think of all your teachers right now, and there's kind of a continuum, right? So how you group teachers and how you treat maybe their focus may be different.
Can I provide some feedback on this content and a scenario that may resonate with other teachers here, especially ones who haven't been speaking? In my experience in my school, I don't think my colleagues and I are at the level of rehearsal. We're not at the level of collaboration. We're definitely at the level of cooperation, dividing and conquering. We have regular meetings, but they're committee meetings, just rubber stamping things, get the meeting done as soon as possible. So we're very, where we're at is actually very, very far from rehearsal. And so I'm thinking, like, how can we even introduce the idea of collaboration to a group of teachers that meets regularly, but we meet regularly? And something that my partner and I were discussing was, actually, there are a lot of things that we do by committee, including the circulation of assessment papers, that could be the appropriate scaffold to try to introduce some elements of rehearsal. Like, if I may digress just a little bit, 2 observations about the rehearsal video. One, it seemed like all the teachers were facing the same material. Like they actually had the same piece of paper on their desk. Like I've never observed that before in my meetings. 2, it seemed like they were like writing things down. Like I'd never observed that at my meetings. So I was like, okay, if we can just like have the same piece of paper at the same meeting, we're all facing the same piece of paper, and there's some writing, I think that's actually measurable achievement, improvement in our teacher learning. And I was thinking, maybe something that might be useful for other people here who may have similar scenarios is, let's actually all face the uniform test or whatever assessment like together and go through it systematically. And going back to this whole idea of safe space to practice, a lot of teachers may think they're incompetent and they may not actually have the language or knowledge and other skills to actually go through an assessment paper together publicly like this. So I think the protocols would be very, very useful to actually have a very structured discussion, a structured, systematic discussion of an assessment paper face to face. And I think that would be a measurable achievement.
So it's interesting, one of the ways, and Sharon, you can jump in too, I'm sure you're thinking of some things too. One of the things that we try to do with teachers is say, hey, everybody bring in a piece of student work on this particular topic. And sometimes that's an opening, because it's not about, I'm going to look at your teaching, I'm going to look at what happened with students. That's your entry. Everybody cares about what happens with their students, right? It's the entry point. So it's a lot of what you're saying about looking at the same thing, looking at something together, and then thinking, well, if we see what students produce, and we know that we need to improve whatever it is, we analyze and we take a look at what the students produced, where in our teaching practice can we think about addressing those issues we see in the student work? Then that gives you that focus. Oh, we should focus on this to see if it makes a difference. Then you know maybe we need to rehearse those things and see what happens with the student work. So the idea of giving somebody a group of common practice to take a look at.
The other thing too is with student work, there's a tendency to want to, it's a vulnerable place to be because I'm coming to a group of my colleagues who don't really know me inside my classroom. And so when I present my student work, there's the idea that I'm presenting the work of my students and there could be some judgments around that. The beauty of the protocol is that it takes that away. And what happens is that you start out very, it's a light touch. So you have the student work, it's what are some of the ahas that you see amongst the student work? What's interesting about the student work? Put yourself in the mindset of the student and try to figure out what that student was trying to tell you. So then the onus is, and the focus is really on the work, not on the individual. And then in the talking about the work, you get everyone's perspectives. And the beauty of it is that there could be someone who has a way into looking at the work that you hadn't thought of. So for example, I'm very kind of creative, out of the box type of thinking, but I also need someone who's very detailed oriented to sort of help pull me in. So when Tammy and I look at student work, or when we do things, she'll see my kind of global perspective, big picture idea. These are my big ahas or my big ideas, and she will hone in because her experience is a little different to help me see some other details that I might have missed. So it's a beginning opportunity for the collaboration among the teachers to take place in a way that's sort of objective.
I want to also comment on something that David said that's very common, is that when teachers meet together, there are times where those kinds of meetings are very logistical, divide and conquer, task-oriented. If we want to change the way our teachers work together and we want their time together to be more about the substance and not the logistics, we have to be explicit about what that time is used for. So the power of a school leader in that sense is, we want you to work on problems of practice, if that indeed is what you want teachers to meet on, right? And so that, what we call agenda creating, or what we decide to do in that 1 hour, we have to think about what do we want teachers to use that time for, and what kinds of supports do we give teachers to do that kind of work? Because the default is the tasks. Not to say the tasks aren't important. There's a time and place for tasks. So you have to also make sure that the tasks are able to be attended to. But if they're different things, then we need to make sure that both of those things are planned for. All right.
All right. So now we're going to transition to using a core practice with students in analyzing teaching. So far, we have looked at quadrant 1, learning about a core practice, and then Tammy just got through talking to you about preparing for rehearsing and practice. These are face-to-face, all right? So we are face-to-face in terms of our rehearsal, face-to-face in terms of being introduced to the core practice. What I'm going to focus on is the third quadrant, which is the beginning of video-based coaching. And so as we look at this particular section, what I want you to do is keep in mind the analysis from the coach perspective. What does the coach do during the conversation? Who is doing the intellectual work in this conversation, and what is your evidence? So now what you're going to see is what that looks like played out. The other way I can say, I can talk about it is, we have been introduced to the core practice, we sat down and sort of rehearsed in some ways too, what my discussion might look like when I go to my class next. Now what's going to happen is we're going to start to see what that looks like and have a comment about that. So this is how we do it in our Hollyhock and other projects. We have a platform that allows us to take a video, I can use it with my camera, And then what the teacher does is that they upload the video, or the video uploads to a platform. And then the beauty of this is that my content cluster, my colleagues and I, and the coach have opportunities to view the video, and then we tab. So each one of these colored comments represents colleagues of the cluster and the coach. And then what happens is that after we have done that, we meet, and you'll see it in the video. Here's Tammy as the coach with one of her fellows. So the idea is that we collaborate, we give feedback, we can ask questions in those comments, but that is how we begin the conversation around the content cluster. And what you're going to see now, not yet, is an example of this. So this is Tina. Tina is one of our English coaches. And these are the 3 members of her content cluster. There's Savannah, there's Catherine, and there's Yanif. And what they're doing is beginning to analyze the video of what Yanif and in particular talked about in this classroom. And what I want you to do is pay attention to what Tina says and how and who is doing the lifting.
So what we're doing in the third, so we did here's the practice, here's what rehearsal would look like if we were all together. This is when we do it in the classroom, right, you saw the video, the way we structure it through many of our programs at CSET is that you have a CSET coach, right, an instructional coach in some way that is within the content area of the teachers. And there are several groups of teachers where we're using the word content cluster to represent the group. So I just wanted to make sure you knew the vocabulary. So the content cluster is the group of 2 or 3 chosen teachers that are working together with the one coach to talk about practice.
And they've been working with each other for a while, so safety has been established and they're very comfortable sharing their information.
I think we are definitely covering our bases on equity.
Okay. Do you have a question that you want to pose to Catherine and Savannah to help you think about where to go from here? Like when you read over the tags that we all left for you, because I want you to kind of decide on the direction of this conversation so that you get the most out of it. What do you want to spend our time talking about?
So I think both of you guys had a lot more buy-in. I don't know if it's buy-in or if it's just kids like participating. I think it had a conversation much closer to what I would like to have. Did you guys have these kids before? Is it because you have small numbers? Like, why do you think you guys were able to sustain pretty good conversations so early in the school year?
I've taught a couple of the kids before, but mostly, I think I started talking to them like that the first day. I like set up that it was a norm in the classroom of like, and I think that, I don't know, maybe I just have always been like, kids aren't always like feel like I'm an approachable person. Does that make sense? Like, I'm not saying that you're unapproachable. I'm not saying that at all. But like, you know how some kids are like, they just tell me too much. Like, so I think that might have something to do with it. Or they've heard like, oh, she's nice.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Catherine, are there certain structures though you're doing in class? Or Savannah, because I think what Yannick is asking about is, if he wants to end up going there, what are, if I'm saying this correctly, Yannick, what are the structures and things he can start doing in class to get kids moving in that direction? Is that kind of what you're asking?
You know what would be a good way to word it? What are you guys doing on your non-discussion days to prep for discussion?
I mean, I think that, like, I try and model, if I'm leading a discussion in front of the whole class, I model it like I would want them to have and like the format of my whole group discussions are the same as what I have as where it's somewhat similar to small groups. So like I always make sure to provide some kind of question.
Vanna, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, I always try to make sure to provide some kind of question to have in front of them. So what I do is I always have like 4 or 5 in mind, and then it's wait for them to write their own. And like I really encourage them to ask.
So what I'd like you to do is, in small groups for a couple of minutes, go back to the initial questions that I asked. What does the coach do during the conversation? And then what does she do to help them analyze their practice? Yeah. Who is doing the intellectual work in this conversation, and what is your evidence? So take a few minutes to think about the video and to answer those questions.
I think that she was monitoring the situation to see whether or not the question was being on target, and I guess she'd already viewed the videos. Obviously, everybody had viewed the videos, and so she was just helping to rephrase the question to target the area a little more specifically, or to help them focus in. And I think she was probably mindful of protocols and trying to keep people within a certain comfort zone, because it seemed to me it got a little bit uncomfortable at that moment. So she was just stepping in to redirect. Yeah.
Who was doing the intellectual lift, though? Who was doing all the work in this particular content cluster? Who was providing advice, giving suggestions? I'm going to play it one more time.
I think we are definitely covering our bases on equity.
Okay. Do you have a question that you want to pose to Catherine and Savannah to help you think about where to go from here? Like when you read over the tags that we all left for you, because I want you to kind of decide on the direction of this conversation so that you get the most out of it. What do you want to spend our time talking about?
So I think both of you guys had a lot more buy-in. I don't know if it's buy-in or if it's just kids like participating. I think it had a conversation much closer to what I would like to have. Did you guys have these kids before? Is it because you have small numbers? Like, why do you think you guys were able to sustain pretty good conversations so early in school year?
I've taught a couple of the kids before, but mostly, I think I started talking to them like that the first day. Kind of like set up that it was a norm in the classroom of like, and I think that, I don't know, maybe I just have always felt like kids aren't always like feel like I'm an approachable person. Does that make sense? Like I'm not saying that you're unapproachable. I'm not saying that at all. But like, you know how some kids are they just tell me too much. Like, so I think that might have something to do with it. Or they've heard like, oh, she's nice.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Catherine, are there certain structures though you're doing in class? Or Savannah, because I think what Yaniv is asking about is, if he wants to end up going there, what are, if I'm saying this correctly, Yaniv, what are the structures and things he can start doing in class to get kids moving in that direction? Is that kind of what you're asking?
You know what would be a good way to word it? What are you guys doing on your non-discussion days to prep for discussion?
I mean, I think that, like, I try and model, if I'm leading a discussion in front of the whole class, I model it like I would want them to have it, I guess. I mean, like the type of questions I ask, and like the format of my whole discussions are the same as when I have it, where somewhat similar to small groups. So like, I always make sure to provide some kind of question.
Savannah, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, I always try to make sure to provide some kind of question to have in front of them. So what I do is I always have like 4 or 5 of mine, and then a space for them to write their own. And like I really encourage them to ask them.
So at your tables, we're going to go back to those 3 questions. Especially the last one. So, what does the coach do during the conversation? What does she do to help them analyze their practice? And why is it important that she does not tell the teachers exactly what to do?
Because I think there might be a translation issue. Okay, so you see there's 4 people in the conversation. The bottom left is the coach, and the top people, the gentleman, and the 2 ladies were the teachers. So they were all working on the core, we're still talking about the core practice of discussion, and so one of the teachers, they all watch each other's classroom, and they show that they've given each other feedback, and so they watch their own classrooms, because all 3 of these teachers do not teach at the same school. Just like your teachers, so just like your teachers in I3, they're in groups where they are across Hong Kong or even international. So these teachers are now one group, and the coach, and it's still academic discussion, the top right teacher says, I watched your video, this is where the video starts. How come my class doesn't look like yours? My kids don't talk like that. Your class, they're talking. So how come? And the coach is thinking, why don't you ask? Right? So there is a prompting. The coach isn't saying, let me tell you everything you're doing wrong. Right? No, that doesn't happen. Why don't you ask them? So he asked them, and the first team, they don't know, did you see they looked at each other? Right? Because those 2 were at the same school, actually. Right? But they watched each other videos. They looked at each other, and so one person said, well, I think it's because the students like me, right? They like me. They're more willing to talk because I'm a nice person, right? And we know her. Catherine is a very nice person, very nice person. But the coach is thinking, that's not what he needs. That's not it, right? So she goes through this explanation and says, I guess they like to talk to me. And Tina, the coach, jumps in, and she asks a question there. Did anyone catch that question? She interrupts. She says, well, and she makes a very important coaching move right there. there was something, a question about structures. What structures? Did you catch it, David? Did you catch it? Yeah, that came right after, right? So the coach didn't, the gentleman asked that after Tina says this. So she says it, she jumps in at that moment and she says, are you asking, so she's asking the gentleman, right? She's asking the teacher. She's saying, are you asking them? She's giving a push because they're not getting there. Are you asking what structures you use in your classroom to get kids to talk? Right? That's basically what she's saying. She's trying to get at what is it you actually do. He doesn't ask that question. He says exactly what David just said. He says, I think I want to reword that question. And he says what?
What are you doing on non-discussion days to prepare for discussion days?
And that is a question about structure. See, your kids are talking in class now, but it's not because they felt like it when they walked in that day. You must have done something before this to get them ready to talk. What was it? Okay, now we're on to something, right? So if you look at what happened here, and just again, that was like a minute and a half, maybe 2 minute conversation, is to get teachers to ask each other, and it's not about asking the coach or the person in authority for the answer. It's to say, because Tina, the coach, did not upload her video. The only videos they watched were each other's. So something good was happening. Something was happening in one group's, in their classrooms, that he says, I don't know how to do that. And that can be seen as an unsafe space, right? To admit you don't know how to do that. But Tina, the coach, is pushing him to say, it's okay to ask them. And of course, the other teachers weren't exactly sure what he was asking, what he needed to know. So the coach had to step in again, right? So if I played it one more time, I think you can catch some of that, right? You'll have access, I think, or I'm not sure you'll have access to that, but I think you get the idea of that kind of coaching, not about giving the answers.
And so what we've done is taken an opportunity to hear a teacher's reflection on analysis with peers and conflict. And this is Sadie Skiles, and she's one of the teachers that has been coached. And her comment is that video allowed me to collaborate with peers for support, motivation, and a focus on improving instruction. So from the previous video, you can see how that's possible. And then just to sort of say, we can see along the side comments that were made by the coach, the fellows, etc.
So this is, if you see on the left, this is the same platform where teachers are using right now in I3 when they're putting their groups. The comments look like this, so that people can they can type right on, and it's time synced onto the video. So you can say, wow, your student really responded like this at this moment, and the comments show up there. But what this also allows for is there's a discussion. So a teacher can ask a question, and on this platform, you can respond, and there can be actual conversation about how to make that work. That's not during the talking time, but that's just written as messages.
So it's two opportunities, in time and then during the coaching. So find someone across the room and discuss what might be the advantages of analysis phase and what might be the challenges of the analysis phase. For this, I want you all to sort of stand up and find some partner to talk to.
都有啲限制啊嘛。我相信唔同嘅人有唔同角度睇嘅時候咧，應該係可以嗰個 limitation 可以 提
供咁唔需要啦。咁但係可能如果嗰一堂係你發覺有啲嘢你解決唔到，或者你個 stuck 咗喺度，咁可能我覺得呢個係一個好嘅可以攞到。我覺得唔夠。都係 time 啦，有時差㗎。
Ideas happening. Suzanne's going to take us home.
So I would like to wrap up this session for you to give you a very specific overview of the coaching, of how your teachers were introduced to the coaching program last June and what they have actually done throughout the year with the CSEC coaches in the content groups. So first and foremost, and I think you heard this stressed throughout this morning, that a key element, I would in fact go so far as to say the most critical element of the program, is the fact that it's non-evaluative. You can see from the videos that were shown as we've described the work in I3 that there is a very, very high level of trust between the individual teachers in the content cluster and the CSEC coach. The teachers know going into this that that is a sacred group. The feedback, the observations, what they have viewed stays within that group. It is not communicated to the broader I3 community, nor is feedback given back to the home school. And that's a very critical element necessary for this work to be done. You have a sense now, hopefully literally a picture in your mind, of what that video platform looks like. Your teachers have the ability to select the portion of their classroom instruction that they're choosing to upload to receive some feedback on. We find that this element of control that the teachers maintain in this video-based coaching model is quite powerful. When you think of the alternative of sending somebody or perhaps a group in to observe a teacher and provide feedback, it's a one-time shot. In this scenario, the teachers can select the video that they want to upload. And often what we find early in the coaching process, teachers will be quite selective about what they choose to show. As that trust has been developed and established, there's a much greater willingness to share what kind of really goes on. As I mentioned yesterday, and I'll share the visual with you again, your teachers had an opportunity to interact in these content cluster groups with the CSEC coach facilitating the interactions 4 times this year. And in fact, they're finishing this last round of work this month. A key element of this work is to help the teachers build their capacity, and hopefully capacity that you can leverage in support of your site, about both the design of the instruction to support all students and their ability to effectively implement that lesson in their classroom. So again, this is the visual that I shared with you yesterday. In the fall, the content clusters met for the first time and worked together on creating the lessons that they chose to implement in the classrooms with the video upload. The next meeting was in fact the upload of those lessons that they had planned together using the technology platform, where each of the teachers could comment on each other's video and have those powerful debriefing conversations like you just saw. They met again early in the year to select and plan a second lesson plan to implement, and are in the process this month of finalizing those debriefing conversations with their groups. content cluster, again, is that close group of individuals teaching the same content area. So the clusters are determined by content area. The goal is to support each other in implementing those core practices that they learned during the Institute. And I think this last bullet, this idea of making practice public and visible, is particularly powerful. So this is literally how the teachers were introduced to the coaching program this June. Each of your teachers was asked to first reflect on what they hoped they would experience from the coaching. And secondly, what they anticipated may be some challenges that might get in the way of this work. I would offer to you that these might be some really interesting dialogue questions to engage in with your teachers when they join you tomorrow. You got a sense of this from looking at the videos with the coaches and the feedback that the teachers gave. But to step back a bit, I wanted to share with you some of the specific guidance that was given to your teachers in terms of how they could best prepare and ask for productive feedback, and what's the way in which they could structure feedback to be most useful to their colleagues. As you go through, you'll see this emphasis on non-evaluative language, but rather asking questions that get their colleagues to be much more reflective of their practice, and to do that intellectual heavy lifting so that the teacher has the aha moment. The second visual gives you some specific productive examples. Do you notice any patterns in the passages she, the student, tends to underline? If so, wondering how that might inform how you design questions for the rest of the work. So you'll see that's a question that caused some thinking to happen and some reflection to happen, and encourages the teacher to come up with the best next steps. I think that the examples also give teachers a really great way to continue to think about their practice. And certainly one of our goals is that the teachers begin to build the self-capacity to continue this type of reflective thinking about their work beyond the program. These were some additional questions that your teachers were asked as they were wrapping up the work at Stanford in June in preparation for this year-long support. What are 2 professional learning goals you might want to work on related to eliciting and responding to student thinking? Which of your classes will you focus on and why? And of course, the first day with students. So again, I would offer these could be very meaningful questions to begin your dialogue with teachers tomorrow, because I think they'll provide some insight in terms of how you might best move this work forward at your site. So finally, Janet's going to kind of wrap this up, connecting what we've done with you for these last 2 days.
All right, this is all that stands between you and lunch. All right, I'm going to quickly put these back up. Yesterday we talked about transformative professional learning that has 5 components: creating cognitive dissonance, providing opportunities to resolve that dissonance, making sure that that cognitive dissonance, that thing that you're wondering about, is connected to teacher students, Then developing a repertoire of practice, the sort of things we talked about today, how you develop a core practice to support that new understanding of what effective teaching and high quality learning looks like. And then time to cycle through that. That was what we talked about yesterday. Today, we unpacked this cycle for instructional improvement and went through each quadrant, and then Suzanne just gave you some specifics on how your teachers engaged in the cycle during the summer. Let's connect those by looking at how the transformative professional development connects. We create that cognitive dissonance in quadrant 1, where we look at a practice such as leading academic discussion and try to help people think about it differently. Then in quadrant 2, there's an opportunity to resolve that cognitive dissonance by actually trying it and rehearsing it in a very safe space. In quadrant 3, we now are connecting that practice to that teacher's context, that classroom and students that teacher works with. And finally, in quadrant 4, by analyzing the teaching, that's part of how we develop that repertoire of practice. And then we go through the cycle more than one time so that we continue to develop instructional improvement over time. So that's the link between what we talked about yesterday and what we talked about today. This afternoon, when you get back from lunch, Tammy and Sharon are going to introduce a model for curricular coherence, which was another thing we mentioned briefly yesterday. So it is It's noon right now. Please be back and ready to work. You want to stick with the 1 hour?
My parents are from Hong Kong. They both lived here. They did not meet in Hong Kong. They met in Texas, where I was born. And my parents come back quite often. Some of you may know my dad. My dad is an alumni from Kojing, and he's here right now. He comes back a lot, and so does my mom. But I grew up even though I was born in Texas, I moved to California when I was very young and grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I grew up in San Jose. And for college, I went down, still in California, but I went hours away to the University of California, San Diego, where I stayed, which my parents were not happy about because they thought I would move right back after I was done. But I ended up staying in San Diego for the next 20 years. And during that time, I was a middle school science teacher for San Diego Unified School District, which is a very, very large school district. And I know that Hong Kong schools are not set up in the same way, but it was basically a large district that had about 125 elementary schools, 30 middle schools, and about 30-something high schools. Different kinds of high schools. We were all public schools. And so within that setting, I taught 7th and 8th grade science. And then after that, I worked in what we would call a school district office, which is, I was still a teacher, so I was not an administrator, but I was more like an instructional coach. And I did the professional development for all the science teachers that taught middle school, elementary school, and high school. And I was a part of a team because we had so many teachers. So I did that for 5 years. That was a long time ago, that's when I met Janet. Janet was doing other work. She was doing a lot of research. Janet was also a teacher, a science teacher, and did a lot of research on how to teach inquiry-based science. And so I went through a leadership program that I was with my school district, sitting here much like you are, and she was standing here training with her team. And through the years we kept in touch, and I started doing some consulting work with her, even though I was still part of my school district. So a couple years went by, and then I got my administration credential and my master's in educational leadership, and I became an assistant principal for the next 5 years of the middle school, at various schools actually, different kinds of schools. And so working at that level was very interesting because it was everything from parental phone calls and emails, everything, to the toilet's not working, to the running around to the students in the halls, or the teacher saying the student needs to be taken here, or so I had the walkie-talkie here, the whistle around my neck, and I always knew when lunch was going to happen, right? Because in our schools, the students move. So every hour, all the kids are out, and we were doing a lot of work. Do you remember those days, Sharon? Yeah. So I did that for a while, and then I went back, and I know how hard that work is. It's very hard. I got married during that time, we decided to have, my husband and I wanted our own family, and the hours were really difficult, and I really wanted to go back to school and get my PhD. So I went back and got my PhD, so took some time off from working, and got my PhD in leadership studies at the University of San Diego. It's a private school in San Diego. So it was actually a PhD in leadership with a specific focus on education. And so it was really more of a global perspective. And what that allowed me to do was I was in a class of people not only focused on education, there was a small group of us focused on education, but there was a considerable amount of other students in my graduating year that were leaders of other kinds of organizations. There were people getting their PhD because they were leaders of churches. There were people that were getting their PhDs because they worked at university settings. There were people getting PhDs because they worked in nonprofit. So, and there were people getting PhDs because they wanted to be leadership consultants. You know, the people that people hire out for businesses, and they bring the people in to say, how can we do our work better? So I went to school with a lot of different kinds of people, and I think that what I did was, came full circle after I finished that. Janet called me and said, I heard you moved back to the Bay Area because I wanted to be closer to my family. So we left San Diego, moved back to the Bay Area, and I had 2 kids at that time, very little kids. And I said, I need my mom, right? I need my mom's help, my mom and dad. And so I moved back up, and I didn't know, well, I have my PhD now, but I'm not sure if I'm going to work. And I got a call from Janet. This is maybe 15 years later after working with her. And she said, hey, I just got to Stanford. And I heard you moved back up here. Let's connect because I think I have a job for you. And so now I've been with CSET for 5 years. So I kind of went all the way around. What that allowed me to do, however, is to be able to work with teachers, and Sharon has a similar path. We worked at different levels. We are able to work with teachers directly, but we also have the heart to work with teacher leaders and school leaders. Because to understand the system at all of those different levels, and to know that we need to all work together to help our students do their best, it's complicated, right? We know there are no easy answers. So I wanted to give a little bit of that story, because as we sit here with school leaders, which really is a treat for us. We have different settings, but most of our work is directly related to teachers and teachers in the classroom, which is fabulous. So this is special with us, and when we come here, we relate to you in a different way, because we understand we actually do not understand all of the pressures in your Hong Kong system. We're just beginning to by having conversations with you. But we do understand, I think what we have in common is to know that working within the systems has its own challenges, no matter what system that is. So, all that being said is that we're now going to help introduce this idea of what we call coherence and conceptual flow. It is not intuitive to know what this is about, but we did go through this in detail with your teachers. So coherence and conceptual flow has to do with this. Can anyone guess what a light bulb, and I know that's probably not an energy-saving bulb, so I'm not sure. Okay, what do you think that coherence and conceptual flow in this picture might, what does this tell you about what we might be doing? somehow something about a connection, right? Okay? Anything else? What if I stood right underneath it? Is it right above my head? Now what do you think?
What if you picture a student standing underneath
The student stood here. Inspired.
Inspired by what?
Like an idea, right? It's an idea. It's about a big idea. We worked with an organization called West Ed. They are a group that Sharon and I did a lot of work with. Their motto was, when we are teaching students, are we focused on teaching them the big idea? Big ideas are extremely important. The objective for this session is to explore how to intentionally leverage what we know about the how people learn research and knowledge of students that we talked about yesterday to build what we call a responsive conceptual flow. That's a lot of words. Let me explain it like this. We want students to understand the big idea. The research yesterday in Finding 2 says that in order for us as people to understand something, we need to be able to have a conceptual framework to link it back to. When we teach in our classrooms, when teachers teach in their classrooms, what they teach, what they focus on, and the order in which they teach it matters, because it must be connected to some kind of conceptual framework. Okay? Learners need a conceptual framework to develop deep understanding. So it's really like this. Discrete, disparate facts. If we think about, facts are important. We're not saying facts are not important. We need to understand facts. But they go together somehow. They fit together in a certain way. And when you put them all together, there's some kind of story of idea that gets formed. Yes, David?
By big idea, would the term essential understanding be curriculum design?
It can be, but it's not always. So if you think of an essential question, those are usually a question about the idea, or an essential idea. So I would say yes, if that idea is written correctly. Just because it's labeled that way in your curriculum does not make it so. Okay, it depends on how that curriculum is written, right? We have this thing called standards in the United States, where it was just a list of facts, but they put a label on top of it, and they said, these are the big ideas we want you to know, and it was just a list of facts. That didn't make it a big idea. Okay, so one of the things that we have your I3 teachers do, this is a teacher's work, not from I3, but from another program that we have. You can see the big idea in the middle. Is that each teacher, whether they teach science or history or math or English, we ask them to choose a unit. We said, choose something that you know you're going to teach. If you're going to teach biology, choose a unit on genetics. You know, something that you know you have to do. And what we're going to do is we're going to take it apart. We're going to look at everything that you need to teach, and we're going to look at the order in which you teach it, and we want to know, can you, as a teacher, identify the big ideas? Do you even know it? And it wasn't a test. It was really a process in which we help them say, if I'm teaching this unit in science, in genetics, can I identify the 5 things or the 4 things that every student needs to know, and then when they understand the facts, do they fit into those areas? Okay. So we build, actually go back one chair. This picture here is called a conceptual flow graphic. It's a tool. Okay? It's a lesson planning tool This probably doesn't look like any kind of lesson plan that you have ever seen. But this, when we teach teachers to do this, they actually can't plan any other way. They can't plan on their computers the written kind of documents that you see without looking at this first. It is, so we call it a conceptual flow graphic. So whenever we talk about a conceptual flow, we mean creating something like this. Okay, so here are the steps to help teachers think about the big ideas that they need to teach. 1, choose a particular program and unit of study. Not 5 units, just one unit. Are units the same here in Hong Kong, where it's like a chunk or a segment of the school year? Do you have, is that called a unit here? It is pretty much, okay. So choose a particular program and study of unit. And you know within that unit, there's probably a series of lessons, right, around that unit. So then the second step is tie the content of that unit to concepts that will tell the story. So we ask the teachers, you're going to tell a story in that unit. We want to hear it as a story. Name the big ideas, and as you go from one big idea to the next, tell me how the story connects. So when you tell a story, there's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end, and within the beginning, middle, and end, there's details, right? Have you ever heard a child tell you about a favorite movie that they have? And they start in the beginning, and there's all sorts of details, and then they get to the middle, and there's all sorts of details, and then the end, it's all sorts of details, but if you're listening and it gets a little bit messed up, the story doesn't quite make sense. I have a 7-year-old. That tends to be, right, her stories. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to tell the story of what we want students to understand and learn, and the way we want to teach it in a way that actually makes sense. Completely. One full story. And we know there's details in that. So we ask the teachers to tie the content of that unit to concepts that will tell a story. They had to develop a story for that unit with a single big idea. One large idea and smaller ideas to connect it. Then they had to, so that's 4, they break the big ideas into supporting ideas. And then with each one of the ideas, they connect the little facts that go with it. Okay? And then they develop, when they look at their big ideas, they say, oh, in each part of the story, this lesson would go here, because that tells that part of the story really well. And this lesson goes here. So they map their lessons for each day so that it fits the storyline. What this allows, this was kind of revolutionary for teachers, for a lot of teachers, particularly those in the primary grades too, I think. In the primary grades, what we found was there are lots of lessons that are really fun, but they don't necessarily teach the ideas we want. But we do it anyway because it's fun, right? There's not always a whole lot of time for fun if it doesn't connect coherently in the kinds of units that we want. So we have big ideas and we have targets, right? So we have to think, this helps us hone in on where do we put our focus, where do we put our energy, and how do we make sure that we are clear on the connections in a particular content area, because if we are not clear as teachers, students aren't going to be clear about it at all. We must be clear before students can be clear. Okay? This is complicated. It looks like it can be complicated, or it can be very easy once we start thinking about it in this way. So right now I'm going to pause, and like Janet said before, we're going to take you through this process, but I can't have the slide up. I don't have 2 screens. So if you can take a picture of this, and what I will do is I'll try to link the slide deck in just a moment as Sharon is doing that, so you can toggle through. But Sharon is now going to take you through. We don't expect you to know what this looks like or feels like without modeling this for you. So Sharon's now going to take you through, how do we do this? How do we think about doing this? And then we're going to let you try to do it on your own. Okay?
phone. The idea that we wanted to talk about was this idea around changes in social media. And so the course, the unit of study that we're developing this conceptual flow around is around the responsibilities of a modern young person. That's our big idea, our unit idea, our course idea. And what we're going to focus on in terms of our unit of study is social media. And so now what we're doing is we're following that framework that we asked you to take a picture of. So our course is responsibilities of a modern young person. We're going to focus in on social media. And as we talked about what are some of the big ideas around social media, these were the ideas we came up with. Digital citizenship, negative influence, positive influence, and communication. So those are our big ideas. And from those 4 ideas, we selected social media influences, teen behavior, and skill development. The one thing I want to mention is that if I talk about these ideas, right now they're topics. So what helps us understand this idea better is that we actually write this as a sentence. So our big idea is that social media influences teen behavior and skill development. I'm going to pause. Questions? Can everyone follow where I am from the previous slide? So I chose a particular program and unit of study. I'm going to tie the content of that unit to concepts that will tell the story. These concepts are going to tell the story. And now I'm going to develop a story for that unit with the big idea. Correct. one thing that Tammy mentioned was that question. This big idea is really based on the question, what at the end of the unit do you want your students to know? So that means that if we were to visit your classrooms, I should be able to go to your students and say, what's the big idea you're learning about? And they should be able to tell me what that is. So we've gone through the program, the responsibilities of modern young person. We talked about the idea of the unit, which is around social media. We've talked about the idea of these are the concepts and ideas that we can choose from. We've chosen one, social media influences teen behavior and skill development. And now we're going to focus on the supporting idea. So example of one supporting idea for this would be social media promotes service to others and positive role models. So once again, we kind of drilled down a little bit more. There are several supporting ideas we could choose from, but this is the one that we're focused on. And once again, look how we've written it in a sentence. So here we, once again, coming back to it, we have our concepts and ideas, we have our big idea, we have our supporting idea. Here we want to highlight the fact that usually you can have more than one idea. So underneath that graphic would be 2 or 3 ideas. And if you go back to the picture that Tammy showed you of the big idea, and it was a circle of smaller ideas, those supporting ideas would go around that. The idea is that these supporting ideas support the big idea, which supports the unit that we're talking about. I think the other thing to keep in mind is that yesterday we talked about knowledge of our students. And so knowing who our students are will help us determine which of those big ideas we choose to work on as well.
So right now I'm going to give a pause. I want you guys to talk at your tables about this idea of storyline in a unit. I do not know, actually I've seen some of your curriculum, so I don't know if I've looked at some of your curriculum, but I do not know how your curriculum is written. Right now at your school tables, and I'm glad you're sitting in your schools, I want you to have a quick discussion about what does curriculum look like at your schools? Are they coherent? Do they tell good stories? Are the teachers clear about what the stories are? Usually it's related to curriculum. Do the teachers know exactly where they're going, and can they identify big ideas? So I want you to just have that conversation and think about your own stuff. your own, what does the math department look like? What does the science department, what does teaching look like? Okay? I've seen some.
Used to when I took physics back in high school, looked at the questions my teachers gave me, the story problems, the application, and I looked for all the variables, right?
1.4, 6.2, right? There's a big list. Right, no sentences, a bunch of words, right? Where the teacher has to fill in the gaps, right, to figure out what it is. We were talking at another table about a science idea. Like, what if I wanted my students to understand electricity? What does a big idea sound like? I'll pause for a second. Okay. And then we had another conversation. What if you're teaching courses like mathematics? And it feels like it's very, very skills-based. What does that look like? How would we pull out the concepts in that? And so at this table we talked about, what does it mean to understand patterns? What does it mean to understand ratios? What does it understand, what does it mean to have some number sense? So we're going to actually have you practice, and I know that not all of you are in the same content area in your school teams. It's not that. We want you to just pick something so that you get an idea of how this thinking works, because it's actually not that easy as we talk through it. So we're going to do a mini version of this. This is only just a little bit of what we put your teachers through over the summer. And your teachers had a lot of help. They had a lot of coaches helping them do this. And they spent several hours, maybe half a day, working on this. We're not going to do that for you, of course. We're going to give you just a taste, just a little bit of what this might feel like to think about something that you would teach in a classroom. So, I know you're school leaders, and some of you have department heads with you, some of you have assistant principals with you. There's different people in your group, and that's okay. You're going to choose one unit, one program, one part of your school. If it's the science department here, and you say, what if I wanted to teach a unit on electricity? Great, that's a unit on electricity. We're going to focus on that, okay, if you're comfortable with that topic. If you're a math person, you're going to say, okay, I'm going to teach something on understanding ratios, okay? So you're going to pick a discrete, any subject area that you are comfortable with. What we showed you was something that was not subject, like content area related, not science, not math, right? Maybe more of like liberal studies idea. That's okay too. So you're going to pick something to try it out on. Then, once your group picks something, you're going to name 2 or 3 key ideas or concepts you want to teach in that unit. So you don't have to think of all of it. Just think of a few things that relate to electricity. What is it? And you're going to write that, the key idea, those key ideas in sentences. Once you write those key ideas, so you have 2 or 3 of them, what is the big idea that connects all those key ideas? You can go either way. You can think of a big idea and the key ideas that go with it. Sometimes it's better to think of all the ideas that go with that topic before you can actually connect them all and say, these are all related and I can name the biggest idea that they fit under. So either way, depending on how your brain thinks. So what this looks like, I'll come back to this slide, is that you're going to come up with, here it is, eventually your big idea. And I know there's 5 of them up here. We're only asking you to come up with 2 or 3. Your teachers had 5 or 6 or 7, right? This, just 3. 3. 2 or 3. Think of some ideas. Think of a big idea. So we're going to ask you to take a piece of paper, they're around the room, the chart paper, and some markers, and use the Post-its. Now, why do you think we want you to write your idea on Post-its and not the big paper? Why sticky notes? There's a really good reason for that. Easy to add and remove, because writing these sentences will become harder than you think, right? So instead of keep erasing on your paper that you're making, you can add things. Everybody can write ideas, and you can write your ideas and put it all together. So you want to write your ideas on sticky notes, and you want to add them to your paper so that you can edit. Okay? So I'm going to, this is what we want you to do. I'm just going to leave this up here. Pick one thing that you can try, and try to write sentences that say the big ideas about that topic. Sharon and I will give you paper.
Studies 啊，
冇啊，冇一個啊。
academic 啊，呢個係 STEM 呢個 major 仲有一個咩啊？
想要做嘢咯，即係譬如可以講到 average speed 啊，可以講到邊一段係最快啊，邊一段係最慢啊。
So if you need help, you can look up here. The big ideas at the top, and there are 4 supporting ideas, and then a bunch of little ones. Okay? Seeing an example will help you.
唔使寫㗎嘛？唔使啦呢啲，唔使啦。好難認啊，英文呢啲唔識認啊，疏忽啊。跟住之後，你係做沙漠咁揾沙漠嘅動物啊，你又揾啲沙翻嚟，跟住佢哋就一齊整咗嚿 model。嗱咁，但係當然啦，其實只不過小朋友放嗰啲嘢上嗰個花布啦，咁佢。
Okay. Now that we're coming back, I see a lot of you working hard still on it. See, it can be really engaging, right? To try to dig into your own stuff, which is really, really good. I put up an example. I think that helped. You know, the ideas are in our mind. Sharon and I were saying, if I were to have you write it in Chinese, it might have been easier, which would have been okay, but then we couldn't check, then we wouldn't know, right? So I put up an English example. We went around and talked to a lot of you during this process, and the task was come up with a big idea in a sentence and the 3 supporting ideas, or the 3 supporting ideas and then the big idea. And when Sharon and I came around and talked to individual tables, and interacted with you and tried to answer questions, what were some thoughts as you went through this? How easy or hard was this task for you, and why would you think that this would be important for your teachers to go through, to be able to do on their own? I know I asked you a series of questions. So maybe the first one. Was this super easy to do? Or was it hard? Tell me about your process. What were you thinking as you did this?
It depends on the stage where you are. If kind of I have got a kind of framework, then it's easier for me to kind of think of associated ideas. But then the next thing is to think of the connection, why they are connected, and what eventually will bring forth a certain outcome, and that's why it justifies a certain choice, and that should bring forth a very good outcome. Now, if that story that means you're going to easily get a consensus for those who have to apply or who have to collaborate, especially if we, because actually we are talking about our own school, the coming plan for the coming 3 years. So the hardest thing is to get colleagues understand why you pick a certain big area to, you know, to pursue, and you get them to do a lot of work, and they usually ask you why this and that, and why not this and that. So this is a rather important practice for us to arrive at some important consensus in order to achieve an outcome that each party will feel that I can, you know, get an achievement there. Otherwise, it will be somebody's good work but not mine, because usually for big, you know, SDP, we have to consider a whole school approach. So that's why that is a rather complicated, but worth it in a way if we can figure out the connection. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, to even talk through. So remember we said conceptual flow, the graphic, the piece of paper is a product. The creation of the conceptual flow is a process. It's that conversation about coming to consensus, about talking about the ideas and how they connect. That's where the process is really meaningful. Eventually you will get to a product. Other ideas, thoughts? Why would this be important for teachers to do? Take a risk. So right now you have a big idea, you have some sub-ideas on there. I think the example helps, so that's in the slide deck now, in terms of crafting how these ideas connect. But we're going to go back to the how people learn findings, right? We were talking about finding two, that's in gray now, right? Learners need a conceptual framework to develop deep understanding. So all those facts and concepts, we need to be able to identify the concepts. So Sharon's now going to talk about, well, how does this process have to do with how people learn finding one?
So as you noticed, Tammy and I visiting some of the tables, we had that driving question. What is it that you want your students to know at the end of the unit? The added wrinkle to your CFG is that you're going to craft that CFG really based upon your students. We spent all day yesterday talking about the knowledge of our students. So when we're thinking of our conceptual flow of ideas, we need to think about how will our students relate to the story. I was over at this particular group and they had an idea that was a great idea, but I also said, what would there happen if, how would you change that idea if it was a little bit of a stretch for a particular group of students? And then they were able to come up with an alternative idea that still got at that. So keeping in mind your students is going to help you craft what that looks like and how you proceed through it. What do your students already know? If their students already have some information, then their CFG is going to look a little differently because they'll be able to take that to the next level because their students have a certain foundation that they can build upon. So it wouldn't make any sense for them to start out at a very elementary level if that's not where their students were. But the only way they would know that is if they knew who their students were. What do students often misunderstand? So as you are looking at your big idea and as you are considering your supporting ideas, at the same time you're thinking about where will there be some misconceptions? And how am I going to think about addressing those misconceptions? Because eventually something's going to happen where you're going to start that lesson out and they're going to come up with something you may not have anticipated. And so knowing ahead of time what that might be is going to help you understand how to better craft that particular and support that particular idea. And then what do your students not know at all? Some of these would look really differently if you're beginning a unit and you have to think about, here's my unit on electricity. Was there anything in the previous lessons or units that sort of introduced that to them so they may have some idea about that? They may know what electricity is in terms of their house, where they live, but they may not know it on the level that I want them to know in terms of appliances, in terms of reading the electric bill. So you're having an understanding of what they don't know is just as important as you having an understanding of what their prior knowledge is. So, as we look at our conceptual flow, we're going to keep in mind the following prompts. As I'm doing my flow, can my students relate to it? If I'm going to talk about earthquakes and that's not what's happening because I live in hurricane land, that could be a bit of a problem. I might need to make adjustments. What do the students already know? And what do they misunderstand about this particular big idea? And then what am I going to do? How am I going to address what they don't know? And that could be something as easy as right before that unit, I'm going to give a pre-test, or I'm going to find out, ask them questions. So keeping in mind our students plays a very important role in that CFG.
David, I hope you don't mind, we're going to share the conversation that we had. So we were looking at, David is an English teacher, is that right? English teacher, and we were looking at a unit that he was trying to dig into. And he said, well, what's interesting is that this is all in the textbooks, but my kids don't read this kind of text. And so Sharon and I said, well, okay, when your students, in order to introduce this idea and this kind of text, which was like a letter to the editor, what are your kids interested in? Well, looking at their phones. Well, what are they looking at their phones? Instagram. And Sharon said, well, who do they follow on Instagram? Right? Who are they following on Instagram? And so we started talking about ideas, but if we're going to know our students, and we know they have no clue, they have no access point into starting to understand something that we need to understand, then we need to create an access point. And that's one of the importances about making a conceptual flow, is that you map out, I know my students need to understand these things. But if there's no access point for them to go into, you create one, right? So we can create a letter that is addressed or is from someone they're following on Instagram. And they have to write a letter, read a letter, and write a letter that responds to that. Well, now you've got the kids engaged, right? And you're still going to teach them about text features, and you're still going to teach them about finding meaning from the text, so that when they have a more complicated text that is about a topic that they might not be interested in at first or might not have an access point into, you already got them thinking about the idea of reading a letter and writing a letter back in response, or having an opinion as you're building that idea. So knowing your students is really important. If they have never, we were talking about in California where we live, right? We have the beach, but we also have the city. We also have the mountains. It depends on where you are. It's not all beach. There are a lot of kids in California who have never seen the beach. So if we are trying to talk to them about marine biology, and they've never been to the ocean, or they've never been to the aquarium, and they have no access to that, we can't assume that they can relate to the things that we're telling them about. They don't live near the beach. So how would we figure out ways to introduce what we want them to understand, to connect to our students?
Remember yesterday we talked about rings of culture? Remember there was the diagram where there was the person and then it was like generation, culture, ethnicity. Those are the kinds of things that you can go back to. So the idea that the students follow the Instagram, that's a generational kind of thing. It's not that they don't read necessarily, it's just that they read in a different kind of way. And so as our point, our position is like, we know you're reading, and we're gonna leverage what you're reading, and then we're gonna show you how to read what it is we need you to read for that exam. Because when they take the exam, it's not gonna be on Instagram. But having done some work, they'll be able to say, oh, now I know what they're talking about if they ask a question about textual features, because I've seen it in a variety of ways. And now, because I understand the concept behind it, I can apply it to whatever it is I need to apply, including the exam. Makes sense? So, big takeaways. If you want your students to have deep understanding, the facts must be given in the context of a story. So I always say the story so far is thinking about the concepts behind the story. Your story needs to be told in small ideas that add together to the big idea. Okay, because I'm telling the storyline. You must know your students enough to tell an effective story. So now we see how all three come together, knowing your students, telling us, having a storyline, and connecting all of those facts and ideas play an important role. So now, one more thing. In How People Learn, the last bullet talks about, the last finding talks about the need for students to be metacognitive, to be able to set goals and analyze their progress to develop deep understanding. You have taken your students through this process, and throughout the process in your lesson, you're going to pause to see where they're at. How well are they understanding the big idea? What do they feel they need to do to understand the big idea better? So it's almost like I used to call it something called a CPA. What's the big idea? So I'm saying to my students, what's the big idea? What is it that I want you to know at the end of this unit? They need to be able to tell me that. The other thing they need to be able to do is chart their process. So what about this big idea? What were the processes that helped you understand the big idea better? We did a lab, we wrote a letter, we had a discussion. Those are ideas that help them, those are activities that help them understand the big idea better. And then it becomes, how did these activities help you understand the big idea better? Because now I need to say, you know what? This helped me better because it was a hands-on activity. I need to understand that if this particular activity didn't work for me, then here's a goal or here's something else I need to do to understand that idea better. The onus of the learning is on the students. So it's them setting their own goals and developing their progress, and you working with the students to understand what that is to help support them through their understanding.
Okay, so in this one, if you have your big idea and you have your supporting ideas, and then you look at your graphic and you say, you know, my students need an access point here. I need to be able to connect with them in these areas. You know, they're either going to easily connect or they're not because you know them well enough to know. And if you don't know them well enough, you're going to find a way to get to know them, right? So it's one of those two things. You either know them or you need to get to know them. Okay, so we had a few questions on the gots and needs, and I want to make sure that I address. When and where do you do metacognitive? What are some strategies for metacognition? Where students can stop in the middle of a unit and they can track and say, this is what I think I understand so far, and this is what I still have questions about. There are several strategies for this. We've been doing some of them, but we didn't tell you, so it hasn't been obvious. Every time that we had you either stop and process and talk with someone, we were having you do wants and needs. I need to know what you understand so far. I could have been, in the prompts that I gave you before you left, I said, just tell me something you got, because you're adults. I'm not trying to assess a particular, I am trying to assess what you got, but I'm not giving you a test on how people learn right now. If not, I would be really, really more like, okay, what exactly do they understand, and be more specific. You can ask specific questions, what we call an exit slip. The kids have to walk out the door, and they're slipped to get out. They can't leave your room until they hand you a piece of paper. And you can either have them put their name on it or not, right? Sometimes you just want to know as a whole for the class. Other times you want to know individual students. And you ask a question for that day saying, what do you think you understand about, I know I keep using that electricity example, electricity today because of what we did. They write just a couple sentences. You can even have them write it on the sticky note. And you have them, you put it here. That's a way to check for kids, for you to check where it's a way of assessment. That's one way so that you can check. So there's two things for that. It's for them to write down so they can think, this is where I am. It's for you to find out where they are as well, two ways. The other way is for you not to find out right away, and they can keep a journal. So I don't know if you keep I know you have lab books like we do in the United States, but we keep, a lot of times we've been introducing this idea of having a journal for students in a particular unit. So this unit has particular journal prompts. Sometimes we ask you to write your thinking, and in that thinking you're going to keep track, and it continues to keep track. If you go to your resource document, there's a click that says note catcher. You could have chosen to use that or not use that, but it was a tool we've given to you. If I were a classroom teacher, that might not be optional. That would probably be mandatory, so that you would write on your Google Doc or type in there what you think so far. And me as a teacher might be able to access that document and take a look and see what you think so far. So that's two ways, where they keep either a digital journal or they can keep a handwritten journal, like an actual notebook, where they keep track of their thinking. The ultimate goal is for them to understand what's in the middle and what's around. But we know they don't understand it right away. We know that it takes time to learn ideas. So you're giving them moments. There's a few other kinds of tools that we can link, we can put on our resource document. One is called a traffic light. In the United States, the traffic is the same here. The traffic light is green for go, red for stop, yellow is for it's about to change, right, kind of in the middle, right? It's, you say, I want to give you sticky dots. And I'm going to write these statements down about the ideas we've covered so far, the ideas we've been talking about in class. How confident do you feel that you understand this? And we want you to be honest, because we're going to give you more opportunities to learn. A green is that I really understand it right now. Yellow is I'm still not sure. And red is I don't get this, you lost me. And so then they can continue to keep track, and you can ask them the same ideas that are written on that paper, which are here, a week later. Now that we've done some more things, where are you on these things? And you should be able to track. So there's different ways to track. I think the important thing here is in your planning. Do you intentionally, or do your teachers intentionally plan places to stop? Because it doesn't always make sense to stop all the time. You want to stop in very strategic areas, right? So do you plan where to stop, where to give students time to think about their learning? And so this tool, this graphic, helps you say, oh, well, it makes the most sense to stop there, right? And give students a chance, because then you're positive it happens. Sharon?
Just the idea that once we have looked at that work, especially the sticky notes is a good example, remember we used those to inform how our lesson was today. And so even within the CFG, it's like you take those sticky notes and then you look at what it says and then you look at your plan and you say, okay, they didn't understand this concept as well as I would have liked them, so I'm going to come back and go over that again as well. So we use that to inform practice for the next day, or we can use that to inform practice for the week. That's important information in the moment.
Yeah, so what Sharon said is I would, if let's say I gave one of these, I would take everything out like we did, and like I showed you on the slide, and I would say, here's the pattern. Everybody said these four said this, these five, and I take a look at where everything is. If the majority of my students are lost, and you know that you have to take them there, they must understand those ideas. There is no reason
Tammy and I were commenting how, I don't know, it's just remarkable how we started at 8:30 and you guys are so still engaged at 4 o'clock. So I would just like to acknowledge all of the hard work that you did today, because this particular afternoon was really hard to understand and try to put into play something that we are offering you within the context of your classroom and your curriculum. So, remember yesterday I talked about routines? Routine after today is to tell us what you got and what you need. So on 2 stickies, a got and a need, and then we will see you tomorrow with all your teachers, which will be really fun.